In 2007, Terex Corporation generated $9.9 billion in revenue. One American company, cranes, scrapers, aerial lifts, mining trucks, dozers, all of it, operating across 170 countries. 60-plus factories on 5 continents. Every major job site on Earth had something with a Terex badge on it. Caterpillar's board of directors was paying attention. Today, the crane division belongs to a Japanese company. The mining trucks are discontinued. The scrapers are gone. The Westport, Connecticut headquarters still files paperwork. The machines that built the empire have been sold off, scattered, or quietly killed. Terex did not lose an engineering war. The machines worked. The balance sheets confirmed it year after year, all the way to the top. So what destroyed the only American equipment company that made Caterpillar nervous? What follows is the forensic record, the acquisition files, the SEC filings, the credit agreements that held the empire together, and the credit freeze that took it apart. At the end, a verdict. If you want more stories like this, subscribe to Iron Ground. This is episode 5. The story begins not on a factory floor, but inside General Motors in 1925. General Motors did not set out to build a construction equipment company. In 1925, GM's truck and coach division existed for one reason: to move goods and people across a country that was paving itself into the modern era. The heavy equipment came later, a logical extension of manufacturing infrastructure GM already owned. The stamping plants, the foundries, the supplier networks, the capital depth. No independent equipment manufacturer in America had access to resources at that scale. GM did not need to compete with the independents. It could simply absorb the market they were building. By 1968, GM had consolidated its heavy equipment lines under a single brand name. The name was Terex, derived from the Latin terra and rex, earth and king. Earth King. The naming was not accidental. It was a declaration of intent. The engineering decision that defined Terex in those early years was not a machine. It was a philosophy. GM chose to build off-highway equipment, vehicles that never touch a public road, designed exclusively to move material on mine sites and construction grades at a scale no independent manufacturer could match. Not by out-engineering the competition on individual specifications, but by applying automobile industry manufacturing discipline to equipment that the industry had always built one unit at a time. Standardized components, high-volume production runs, supplier contracts that only a company the size of General Motors could negotiate. The result was a product line that covered scrapers, motor graders, and off-highway haul trucks, dump trucks built for mine sites with payloads measured in tons, not pounds. And in 1974, GM's Terex division revealed what that philosophy could produce at full scale. The Terex 3311, called the Titan. At its introduction, the Titan was the largest haul truck ever built. The payload capacity was 350 tons. The engine produced 3,100 horsepower. The tires stood 11.5 feet tall. A grown man could stand inside one and not touch the top. The Titan was not designed for a catalog. It was designed to demonstrate what Terex could build when the ceiling was removed. One machine, one number, one record that stood for nearly a decade. The Titan entered service at the Kaiser Resources coal mine in Sparwood, British Columbia in 1978. It operated there for more than a decade, moving coal through one of the most demanding mining environments in North America. The machine was not a prototype. It worked every shift it was asked to work. That is what Terex was in its first chapter. Not the largest equipment company in America, but the one with the most dangerous potential. In 1980, GM began looking for an exit. The heavy equipment market was contracting. The 1979 oil shock had driven up operating costs across every construction and mining sector in America. GM's core business, automobiles, was absorbing the same pressure from a different direction. The conglomerate logic that had made Terex possible in 1968 looked less convincing in 1980. By 1986, GM had sold Terex to a West German industrial group. The brand changed hands again before the decade was out. By 1993, Terex was generating approximately $500 million in annual revenue, carrying significant debt and operating with a product line that had not been meaningfully updated in years. It was, by any operational measure, a company in managed decline. Randolph Lenz did not see managed decline. He saw a platform. Lenz became CEO of Terex in 1993. What followed over the next 14 years was one of the most aggressive acquisition campaigns in the history of American construction equipment. Lenz's thesis was straightforward. Caterpillar dominated dozers, excavators, and motor graders. But Caterpillar had left entire product categories underdeveloped: tower cranes, rough terrain cranes, aerial work platforms, material handlers. If Terex could acquire the established manufacturers in those categories faster than Caterpillar could develop competing products organically, Terex would own the gaps in CAT's portfolio. The acquisitions came in sequence. PPM Cranes. DMEG, the German crane engineering house whose crawler cranes were operating on the most technically demanding lift projects in the world. Genie Industries, whose boom lifts and scissor lifts had become the default aerial access platform on construction sites across North America. Fuchs, material handlers. Fantuzzi reached stackers for container ports. Each acquisition added a product line Terex did not previously manufacture. Each acquisition was financed with debt. Leverage applied at scale, in a credit environment where borrowed capital was cheap and refinancing was routine. The logic was sound. The execution was disciplined. By 2007, Terex operated in 170 countries, employed approximately 22,000 workers across more than 60 manufacturing facilities, and posted $9.9 billion in annual revenue. For 1 year, 2007, Terex ranked among the top 3 construction equipment manufacturers in the world by revenue, alongside Caterpillar, alongside Komatsu. The empire felt permanent. The men on the factory floors had no reason to believe otherwise. The machines were selling. The order books were full. There was one number, buried in the financial filings, that told a different story. But in 2007, no one on a job site was reading the debt covenants. Randolph Lenz left Terex in 2007. He departed as chairman with the company at its peak, $9.9 billion in revenue, operations on 5 continents, a product portfolio that covered more equipment categories than any single American manufacturer had ever assembled. By every visible measure, he left at the top. 18 months later, the company he built posted a $1.3 billion net loss. That timing is not incidental. It is the most precise data point in this entire story. Lenz did not flee a burning building. The building was not yet burning when he walked out. But the man who designed the financial architecture of Terex, who understood better than anyone how the acquisition machine was structured, what it required to function, and what would happen if the one variable it depended on disappeared, left in 2007. The credit markets froze in September 2008. There is no documented statement from Lenz explaining the timing. No interview on record addresses it directly. What the record does show is this. The man who spent 14 years building an empire on leveraged acquisitions departed at the precise moment the empire was fully extended, before the extension became a liability, and before the liability became a crisis. The workers at the Waverly, Iowa scraper plant did not leave in 2007. The crane riggers trained on DMEG equipment did not leave in 2007. The operators running Genie lifts on job sites across North America did not leave in 2007. They stayed. They kept the machines running. They had no reason to read a debt covenant. Lenz built something real. The machines were real. The revenue was real. But the foundation beneath it was borrowed. And the man who knew that best was already gone before the ground gave way. Did you know that? Write it in the comments. I read everyone. In 1968, General Motors was forced by the United States Department of Justice to divest Euclid Road Machinery, the Ohio-based manufacturer whose rear dump haul trucks had become the backbone of post-war American construction. The DOJ ruled that GM's ownership of Euclid constituted an antitrust violation. GM sold it to White Motor Corporation under legal compulsion. If you watched Iron Ground's episode on Euclid, you know what happened next. White Motor collapsed. The Euclid brand, the dump truck that built the interstate highway system, that moved earth on projects from the Hoover Dam approaches to the Alaska pipeline corridor, went into receivership along with everything else White Motor owned. In 1980, Terex acquired the Euclid product line out of that receivership. For the next 2 decades, Terex was the custodian of the Euclid name, the machine that had survived General Motors, survived an antitrust ruling, survived White Motors bankruptcy, was running under a Terex badge. The lineage was intact. The American ownership was intact. The engineering knowledge that Euclid's workforce had accumulated across 50 years of building haul trucks was still housed in American factories, still operated by American workers. Then, 2014 arrived. Terex, deep in the divestiture sequence that followed the 2008 collapse, sold the Euclid brand to Volvo Construction Equipment of Sweden. The full arc, built by Americans in Hudson, Ohio. Forced out of GM by federal antitrust order. Orphaned by White Motors collapse. Rescued by Terex. Sold to Sweden when Terex ran out of options. The machine that survived everything American industry could throw at it was finally sold because an American company needed to service a debt. Did that surprise you? Write it in the comments. In 1993, Randolph Lenz made a specific decision about how Terex would grow. That decision made complete sense for the credit environment he was operating in. Every acquisition that followed was built on the same logic, the same structure, the same assumption about what the future would look like. It took 15 years for the market to test that assumption. By September 2008, the test had already begun. Randolph Lenz did not invent a machine. He invented a method. The method was this: identify the product categories Caterpillar had neglected. Find the established manufacturer in each category. Acquire it at a price the credit markets would support and integrate it into a portfolio broad enough that no single customer, no contractor, no mining operation, no infrastructure project would ever need to look anywhere else. One company, every machine, every job site. The financing instrument was leverage. Borrowed capital applied at scale against projected revenue from the acquired companies. In the language of corporate finance, this is called a leveraged acquisition strategy. In the language of a job site, it means this: Terex bought the crane with a loan, expected the crane's revenue to service the loan, and used the crane as collateral to borrow money for the next acquisition. That structure required 3 conditions to remain stable. First, interest rates had to stay low enough that the cost of the debt did not consume the revenue from the machines. Second, the construction and mining markets had to remain active enough to keep order books full. Third, the credit markets had to remain open so that maturing debt could be refinanced on acceptable terms. From 1993 to 2006, all 3 conditions held. For 13 consecutive years, borrowed capital was cheap, construction demand was strong, and refinancing was routine. Every acquisition Lenz executed was rational under those conditions. Every decision that followed from it was defensible. The men who structured the deals were not reckless. They were correct for the world they were building in. That is the critical distinction. They were not wrong. They were precisely right, for exactly as long as the conditions lasted. Caterpillar in 1993 was a formidable company with a specific and documented blind spot. Cat had spent the previous decade defending its core product lines: dozers, excavators, motor graders, articulated trucks, against intensifying competition from Komatsu and a wave of Japanese manufacturers whose machines were undercutting American pricing across the board. Cat's response was internal: manufacturing efficiency, cost reduction, dealer network consolidation. What Cat did not do, could not do, given the internal focus the competitive pressure demanded, was develop meaningful presence in the adjacent categories. Tower cranes, crawler cranes with lift capacities above 500 tons, aerial work platforms, container handling equipment, material handlers for scrapyards and recycling operations. These were not marginal markets. By the mid-1990s, the American construction industry was consuming aerial lifts at a rate that no existing manufacturer could supply fast enough. Genie Industries, operating out of Redmond, Washington, had built the dominant platform in that category, but Genie was an independent company, subscale relative to the demand curve it was riding. The crane market was similarly fragmented. PPM in France, Demag in Germany, Grove in Pennsylvania, each with regional strengths and no single manufacturer capable of supplying the full range of lift capacities a major project required. Terex moved into every one of those gaps. The Genie acquisition in 2002 gave Terex the #1 position in aerial work platforms overnight. The Demag acquisition gave Terex crawler crane capability that Caterpillar could not match from its existing product line. No amount of organic engineering investment could have assembled that portfolio in the time frame Lentz executed it. The strategy worked because the credit environment made it work. Low rates, strong demand, open refinancing windows. 3 conditions, all 3 present, for 13 years. On September 15, 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy protection. It was the largest bankruptcy filing in American history. Within 72 hours, the interbank lending market, the system through which financial institutions loan money to each other to keep credit flowing, effectively stopped functioning. Banks that had been refinancing corporate debt as routine business practice stopped answering the phone. Terex was carrying approximately $3.2 billion in long-term debt on the day the credit markets closed. That number requires context. At $9.9 billion in annual revenue, $3.2 billion in long-term debt was not inherently catastrophic. Managed under normal credit conditions, with refinancing available, with construction demand holding, with order books full, the debt was serviceable. The acquired companies were generating revenue. The machines were selling. What changed in September 2008 was not the debt. It was the assumption beneath it. The construction equipment market contracted by approximately 40% in 2009. Projects that had been funded, permitted, and scheduled were suspended. Mining operations cut capital expenditure to minimum maintenance levels. The infrastructure spending that had kept Terex's order books full across 30 product categories disappeared inside a single fiscal quarter. Terex posted a net loss of $1.3 billion in 2008. The company that had generated $9.9 billion in revenue 12 months earlier was now burning through cash reserves to service debt on machines it could no longer sell. Every acquired company, every crane division, every aerial lift platform, every scraper line that had been an asset under normal conditions became a liability under these conditions. The portfolio that made Terex dangerous in 2007 made it fragile in 2008. Caterpillar reported a net loss in 2009 as well. The downturn hit the entire industry, but Caterpillar entered the crisis with a lower leverage ratio and a stronger balance sheet. It emerged without a single major divestiture. It did not sell a crane division. It did not exit a product category. It contracted, absorbed the loss, and waited. Terex did not have that option. The debt had a schedule. The credit markets were closed. The only available instrument was divestiture. Selling assets to generate the cash the refinancing window no longer provided. The machines were still good. The order books would recover. But the debt was due now. Terex's acquisition strategy was not a financial trick layered over a real company. The strategy was the company. The portfolio of acquired engineering, Demag's crane technology, Genie's aerial platform expertise, the Euclid Hall truck lineage. That was the product. Lentz did not build a machine. He built a machine for acquiring machines, and for 13 years, that machine outperformed every alternative available to an American equipment manufacturer operating in Caterpillar's shadow. The bitter irony of this entire story is precise and unambiguous. the financial architecture that allowed Terex to challenge Caterpillar across more product categories simultaneously than any single American manufacturer had ever attempted, required the one thing that vanished in September 2008: functioning credit markets. Caterpillar built its dominance on engineering. Terex built its challenge on leverage. Both strategies worked, until one of them met a credit freeze. Terex did not need a better crane. It needed a better balance sheet. And when the market decided that balance sheets mattered more than cranes, Terex had nothing left to sell except the cranes. Read that again. The divestiture sequence that followed was not a recovery strategy. It was an orderly liquidation of the empire's most recognizable components. The mining truck line, gone by 2012. The Fuchs material handlers, divested. The Euclid brand, sold to Volvo Construction Equipment of Sweden in 2014. And, in 2017, the asset that represented the deepest engineering legacy in the entire Terex portfolio, the Demag Crane Division, sold to Tadano of Japan. The engineers at Demag had not failed. The Demag CC 8801 crawler crane, capable of lifting loads exceeding 1,600 tons, was among the most capable lifting machines ever built. The machine was right. The paper it was built on was not. What Terex proved across 14 years of assembly and 9 years of dismantlement is that in the American equipment industry, the balance sheet does not follow the machine. The machine follows the balance sheet, and when the balance sheet is gone, the machine goes with it, regardless of what it can lift. The machines Terex assembled were legitimate, not adequate, not competitive. Legitimate, in the precise sense that they represented genuine engineering achievement at the highest level the industry recognized. The Demag CC 8801 crawler crane, developed under Terex ownership, carried a maximum lift capacity exceeding 1,600 tons. That is not a catalog figure. That is a machine capable of lifting the main span girder of a highway bridge, a single steel structure weighing as much as a loaded Boeing 747, and placing it with millimeter precision. The CC 8801 was deployed on nuclear power plant construction, offshore platform assembly, and petrochemical refinery projects where no alternative machine existed at any price. When Tadano of Japan acquired the Demag division in 2017, they did not acquire it to dismantle it. They acquired it because the engineering inside it was worth more than the purchase price. The Genie boom lifts Terex acquired in 2002 became the default aerial access platform on American construction sites. Walk onto any commercial job site in the United States today and count the aerial lifts. The majority carry a Genie badge. Terex bought that position, but buying it required recognizing it was worth buying, and that recognition was a form of engineering judgment. The Terex Titan, the machine that opened this company's story, moved coal at the Kaiser Resources mine in Sparwood, British Columbia, for more than a decade without a structural failure of its primary systems. 350 tons per load. Every shift, the machine worked. Engineering verdict, the machines were right. Every one of them. Terex was killed by the structure of its own success. The counter-argument deserves a full hearing. Terex's diversification across 30 product categories and 170 countries should have provided insulation against any single market shock. When crane demand fell, aerial lift demand might hold. When North American construction contracted, Asian infrastructure spending might compensate. That is the textbook case for diversification, geographic and product spread as a hedge against concentrated risk. The counter-argument is correct in every respect except one. Diversification hedges against demand shock. It does not hedge against a simultaneous credit freeze across all markets at once. When every division of a leveraged company requires debt refinancing, at the same moment the credit window closes, diversification becomes its opposite. Every additional product line is an additional debt obligation. Every additional geography is an additional currency exposure. The portfolio that distributed risk under normal conditions concentrated it under crisis conditions. Caterpillar survived 2008 without a major divestiture because Caterpillar's growth was funded by retained earnings and moderate leverage. The slower, more expensive method that Lentz had rationally rejected in 1993 as incompatible with the pace of market opportunity he was pursuing. Lentz was right that organic growth was too slow. The credit markets proved that leveraged growth was too fragile. Final verdict. Terex was not beaten by a better machine, a stronger competitor, or a superior engineering culture. It was beaten by a debt schedule and a credit freeze that arrived simultaneously. The institution failed. The engineering did not. It is early morning at the Terex manufacturing facility in Waverly, Iowa. The scraper plant has been running this shift since before dawn. The floor smells of hydraulic fluid, cutting oil, and cold concrete. The specific combination that every man who has ever worked a production floor knows without being told what it means. It is 5:47 a.m. The fluorescent lights have been on since 4:30. The last scraper on the line is a TS-14 variant, an elevating scraper, meaning it carries an internal flight elevator at the front of the bowl that assists in loading material without requiring a push tractor. The elevator replaces brute force with mechanical advantage, a rotating chain of paddles that lifts earth into the bowl as the machine moves forward under its own power. On a grading job, a machine like this cuts, loads, hauls, and spreads in a single continuous pass. No separate loader, no separate truck, one operator, one machine, the entire earth-moving cycle completed without stopping. The shift supervisor walks the line at 5:47. He checks the hydraulic connections at the elevator drive, checks the bowl apron seal, checks the ejector blade travel by hand, pressing the control and watching the steel wall move from rear to front of the bowl and back. The sequence takes 4 minutes. He has run it every morning for 11 years. He runs it this morning the same way. The engine turns. The torque converter, the fluid coupling between the engine and the drivetrain that allows the machine to absorb load without stalling, spools up to operating temperature. The scraper moves on to the test pad under its own power. At the far end of the pad, the operator lowers the bowl, engages the elevator drive, and the machine loads against the test material, compacted gravel banked at the edge of the pad for exactly this purpose. The elevator pedals turn, the bowl fills. 54 cubic yards of material, roughly the volume of 2 fully loaded standard dump trucks, in a single pass. The operator cycles the ejector, spreads the load across the back half of the pad, raises the bowl, and brings the machine back to start position. The machine does not hesitate. The elevator does not slip. The ejector blade travels its full stroke without binding. Everything works. The operator shuts down the elevator drive first, then idles the engine, then isolates the hydraulic circuit, the sequence he was trained on, the sequence every Terex scraper operator knows. The torque converter decouples. The engine idles to a low, even rhythm. Then the key comes out. The hydraulic system bleeds pressure through the relief valve. The sound is a hiss, sharp at first, then tapering. And then there is no sound at all from the machine. The scraper sits on the test pad. The floor does not stop. There is no announcement. The other workers finish their own sequences, log their own checklists, rack their own tools. The shift supervisor writes the final production entry in the log. He does not look up when he writes it. One operator, on his way past the test pad toward the exit, puts his hand flat against the side of the bowl for a moment, the steel still warm from the hydraulic system running through it. He does not stop walking. He does not say anything to the man beside him. Were you there? Did you run Terex equipment? Tell us in the comments. The floor clears in 12 minutes. The scraper remains on the test pad. The overhead lights stay on. The company's accounting department in Westport, Connecticut, is already processing the asset transfer documentation. The machine is still registered to Terex. By the end of the fiscal quarter, it will not be. The operators walk out into a parking lot that looks the same as it did yesterday. The sky over Waverly, Iowa, is the same color it was yesterday. The machines are still there. The company is already somewhere else. 3 things left with the last machine. Not 3 abstract losses, 3 specific, irretrievable capabilities. The first was integration knowledge. The engineers and riggers who worked across Terex's portfolio understood something no catalog could document: how to make a Dimag crawler crane and a Genie aerial platform work in the same lifting sequence on the same job site, coordinated through a single lift plan, operated by crews trained on both machines under a single safety protocol. That cross-product knowledge, the understanding of how 30 different product lines functioned as a single system, existed only in the practice of operating them together. It did not transfer to Tadano when the crane division was sold. It did not transfer to Volvo when the Euclid line was sold. It dispersed with the workforce that held it. The second was craft lineage. The scraper operators at Waverley, the crane riggers certified on Dimag equipment, the aerial lift technicians trained on Genie platforms, each of them represented the end point of a chain of human expertise that stretched back through every machine they had ever serviced. Every operator they had trained under, every foreman who had shown them the specific physical sequence for a specific repair on a specific model. That chain does not transfer in an asset sale. Volvo bought the Euclid name. It did not buy the men who had spent 20 years learning how the machine failed and how to prevent it. The third was the capability itself. At its 2007 peak, Terex was the only American company that could supply a complete equipment fleet: crawler cranes, aerial lifts, scrapers, haul trucks, material handlers, reach stackers, from a single source, under a single service network, with a single point of accountability on a project. That capability does not exist under any American flag today. The individual machines still exist, built by their various acquirers in their various countries. The system that connected them is gone. The golden age had a price. The acquisition era displaced thousands of workers at the companies Terex absorbed, consolidated regional manufacturing operations, and reduced the supplier ecosystems that had supported independent manufacturers for decades. Both things are true. The machines were real. The cost of assembling them was real. What remains is the question that the Terex story does not answer and cannot answer. What does it mean when the only American company capable of challenging the dominant manufacturer is dismantled not by a better machine, not by a stronger competitor, not by a failure of engineering, but by the terms of the loan it used to buy one? Terex's story is not the story of a company that lost. It is the story of a company that won every contest it entered, every product category it targeted, every acquisition it executed, every market it moved into, and was destroyed by an accounting entry on a debt schedule it could no longer refinance. The machines it assembled are still running. The Dimag cranes are lifting on job sites in Japan, in Germany, in the Gulf. The Genie platforms are on commercial construction sites across North America. The Euclid haul trucks, the ones that survived GM, survived antitrust, survived white motor, survived Terex, are moving materials somewhere on this continent right now under a different badge. What Terex proved, and what its dismantlement confirmed, is the most precise truth about American industrial capitalism that this channel has yet examined. The balance sheet does not follow the machine. The machine follows the balance sheet. Engineering without capital is a museum exhibit. Capital without engineering is a ledger entry. Terex had both and lost the capital first. The empire is gone. The machines are still working. The company that built them cannot be found on any of the job sites they are running. Close your eyes. It is 1978. You are standing at the edge of the Kaiser Resources coal mine in Sparwood, British Columbia. The mountain is behind you. The pit is in front of you, and it is deeper than anything you have seen built by human hands. And then the Terex Titan 3311 comes around the lower bench. The tires are 11.5 feet tall. The payload is 350 tons of coal, black and wet from the seam, loaded in under 4 minutes by a shovel the size of a 2-story building. The engine is running at steady load, 300 horsepower. And the sound it makes is not a roar. It is a pressure. You feel it in your sternum 10 seconds before you hear it in your ears. The ground carries it before the air does. The machine moves at operating speed up the haul road. It does not labor. It does not hesitate. The suspension absorbs the grade change at the switchback without breaking stride. Everything works. Every system, every component, every weld in the frame, working exactly as the engineers designed it to work in 1974 in a drawing office that believed the machine they were building would run forever. Open your eyes. The engineers were right. The machines worked. What failed was not the engineering. It was the belief that you could assemble an empire out of borrowed capital, call it a company, and expect the credit markets to hold still long enough for the machines to pay off the debt. Terex is still here, in name. The machines that made it dangerous are gone. The workers who ran them have moved on. The knowledge they carried has dispersed into the industry, the way knowledge always disperses when the institution that held it stops needing it. If you want to remember what it was, subscribe to Iron Ground. We're not done yet.